Hi, everybody. So, I wanted to give a quick intro. This is an interview with me and Cheryl Deesh from Sigma Wolf Coaching. And she talks to me about my diagnosis story. If you're interested in hearing Cheryl's diagnosis story, it will be included on my new podcast, The Eavesdrop, when it finally drops. And if you just can't wait for the podcast, it's already up on her website. And I'll drop the link in the description below so you can go check it out. I hope you enjoy.
Everyone, it's Cheryl Dix here. Cheryl Deech here. You decide. It's up to you. This is Sigma Wolf Life Coaching and Podcast. Just go to our website, take a look at other videos that are here. We talk about everything. We talk about ADHD, we talk about addiction recovery, and we talk about emotional wellness. Everything you need, courses, coaching, one-on-one in groups. And I do public speaking because, that's my passion. Why? Because I have ADHD. So today we're going to talk with my great friend. Her name's Janine VanStee. She is an ADHD life coach. She is living in Michigan in the United States, and we've had a great friendship built in understanding our own personal journeys and decisions when it comes to ADHD. And the diagnosis, that's a thing. We all have gotten a diagnosis. We have a diagnosis story. And if you've looked at my site, I've asked Janine to do an interview with me. So that'll be up there very shortly. And you can hear my story. But she also has a really great story. And if you have an ADHD and you're a woman and you're retired or almost in retirement, perimenopausal, whatever's going on for you, we're here to help. So I want to introduce Janine VanStee, my friend and ADHD life coach, to share her personal, intimate, and vulnerable story about what it means to be diagnosed with ADHD. Welcome, Janine.
Thank
How
you,
are you?
Carol. I am doing great because I'm here with you.
Oh, that's so sweet. So, diagnosis, ADHD, amongst all the other things that we navigate as strong women. Why don't you tell me personally, as if I've never heard it before, what was it like for you to get diagnosed?
It's a story, and I think everybody has their story, especially when you're diagnosed as an adult, but even as kids, you still have a story of before you knew you had ADHD and after. I've worked in special education for 30 years. I have worked around ADHD students. I have worked with ADHD people in my environment. As a matter of fact, my entire family has ADHD, my husband included. My mother even was diagnosed with ADHD at 79. So you would think that I would be able to pinpoint that and say, look, I've got ADHD. I had some suspicions, um, but before I was diagnosed, I'd already been diagnosed with anxiety, depression, OCD, and I even said to my husband one night, I said, I would say that I possibly have ADHD, but I don't need another damn diagnosis, right?
Yeah.
I don't need somebody to tell me one more thing that's wrong with me because I've got plenty, right? Not realizing that the ADHD diagnosis would eventually explain a lot of the other stuff, right? But at that time, I was like, I don't need one more thing wrong with me. Well, as I was in perimenopause. I was working in an administrative job at central office. And I was doing well. Everything was clicking along. I was doing great. And then all of a sudden, nothing was working. Nothing was clicking. I couldn't focus on anything. I was clicking between things. I was not being productive and couldn't figure out why. So went to my psychiatrist and I said, I'm wondering about my meds, is there something we can, just because I feel like I'm really out of it lately. I just can't. And so we had to go back all the way to childhood and talk about childhood. And she's like, so, what did your report cards say? And I said, well, they all said she's a great student. She pays great attention and she talks a lot. What my teachers didn't realize is I was masking wonderfully. I was not paying attention. I just figured out how to look like I was paying attention. And a lot of girls are really good at masking. Um, so I masked and I used my techniques and my strategies and those types of things. But my entire life, Cheryl, I remember looking around at everybody else and I'm like, I'm successful. I'm doing okay. I'm getting decent grades except for my freshman and sophomore years, and that's a different story, but we won't talk about that. Why is it so much easier for them? Why am I working so hard? And that's how I felt my whole life. I looked around at other people who were successful as I was because I was successful, but it just seemed so much easier for them. And I didn't understand. And so when my doctor said, I think you have ADHD, I kind of balked at it, even though I had suspected it, but I had also wanted to not have another diagnosis and another pill and all
Mhm.
those things, right? So yeah, when I got diagnosed, she said, I think you have ADHD, and a lot like your story. Give this a try. Just humor me. We're gonna just give you a little medication and see what it does. And I took the medication and I said, is this how normal people feel? The buzzing energy, because I have the hyperactivity, the buzzing energy that was going through my body all the time, like an electrical circuit, was calm. And all of a sudden I felt calm. And I know it's a stimulant, right? It's supposed to get you. No, I felt calm. I loved it. And so taking the meds, we did the gradual, change up and got a little bit more. The one thing that I would say is I have a great psychiatrist who always wanted to know exactly how I was responding to the medication, adjusted the medication as needed. It was not the first med I was on that finally worked well for me. And so I that was a good part of my story, is that she was really on top of it and she knew what I needed to do. So then I got my ADHD diagnosis and I went and I said to my boss, guess what? I have ADHD. And she said, well, of course you do.
Grr.
And that she was not the only person. Many, many, many people said, well, of course you do. I thought you knew that. And I was angry. I was really angry because I felt like everybody had been keeping this secret from me for all these years. And why didn't they tell me? If I'd known sooner, you, when you get diagnosed and you realize that if you'd have known sooner, that I maybe wouldn't have made the mistakes I made, and oh, how has this been affecting my relationships and my marriage and the decisions that I made? And would I have done it that way? And all the what ifs, what ifs, what ifs, what ifs. And I finally came to a place where it was like, I can't change that. I can't change what has happened. I can only change what's moving forward. And part of moving forward was retiring from my education career. And I wanted to be a life coach. I wanted to be an ADHD life coach because I'd worked with it my whole life. I knew it pretty intimately. Um, so I went and I got special training just with Cheryl. That's where we met, in a program where we got our ADHD life coaching degrees or certifications, not degrees. Um, and really started to look at ADHD and me. And I realized part of the problem with me not diagnosing myself was because I never was looking at myself analyzing, right? I was always looking at the kids analyzing, and being like, okay, this is what I see this way. But I wasn't doing that to myself. And once I started doing that to myself, it made a lot more sense. And one of my favorite sayings is you can't change what you don't understand. And once I had an understanding, I was able to come up with more strategies and techniques and work with Cheryl to be able to address some of the needs that were associated with it. And through this process, we've both learned so much. And I'm so grateful for that. But I've come out on the other side as an ADHD life coach. Um, and I love what I do. I love working with people who have ADHD, and I understand where they're coming from. So, yeah, at first it was not great, but honestly, the diagnosis now, when I look back, is kind of a gift because it explained so much, and it also gave me a jumping off point to where I would be able to go forward with it. So that's my
Wonderful.
story.
You said some such powerful things there. It just shook me a little bit, which is I don't need another diagnosis.
Mm.
How many times have we or I said, "Oh, I don't want to take another pill or get another label," right? And we aren't our labels. However, when you get that exposure and that understanding, you don't have to mask anymore. Because
Mhm.
now, like you said, it's easy to observe behaviors in other people, particularly your students. This diagnosis gave you that opportunity to reflect back on your and observe your own behavior.
Mhm.
And now that jumping off point going, oh, that's why I do that. And that's why I do that. And I love that. So and being successful. There are so many high profile people that are successful,
Absolutely.
actors, leaders, presidents, so many people that have ADHD. Why? Because we can process a ton of information really, really quickly. And so
Mhm.
many of us are successful. So people go, well, how is it holding you back? Because they don't realize how hard we have to work to
Mhm.
be successful. So learning more about what you have to do to be successful was the journey that I heard that you were taking. And the what ifs, love that. What
Mhm.
if this? What if that? Would I have made these choices and that choices or those choices? And you to choose to say, okay, this is where we are right now. And you can, and we've done the work. We've done the work with your emotional wellness and intelligence, working with grief and the grief of the diagnosis and some of the decisions that we've made growing up, those growing up years, those hard years, when if you only knew, maybe you would have made different decisions, but those decisions were made. So
Mhm.
learning to do that forgiveness. And so I just have one extra question for you. You said you were perimenopausal on the verge of retirement when you make this decision. Um, Other women that are mothers, wives, career bound, just doing really well and starting to feel that way and going through that next stage of life, what advice would you give them to say, go in, get checked? Worst case, they say, no, you don't have ADHD. Best case, you do, and now you have a plan to move forward.
Mhm.
What would be your advice to someone in your
Um,
age bracket um, and life experience?
my first piece of advice would be give yourself grace. Be kind to yourself. We're so careful to be kind to others sometimes, but we forget to be kind to ourselves. Um, and if you suspect that you may have ADHD and you want to find out, I would suggest you go get a diagnosis or seek a diagnosis, and you may or may not have it because there's lots of other things that kind of look like ADHD too, because you have the trauma, you have brain injuries, you have actually anxiety and depression can look like ADHD, or it can be caused by ADHD. So you've got probably a lot of those components. But what I would say is you don't have to have ADHD to have some of these executive function problems, right? And so you don't need to wait for a diagnosis to start trying new strategies and finding new ways of doing things that work better for you. A diagnosis is helpful. Medication is helpful. I will never tell anybody whether they should or shouldn't take it, but I would definitely say start looking at some of the ADHD videos that are giving you those strategies, giving you that information, and start playing around with some of that stuff with yourself because you kind of have to play with your brain a little bit to figure it out. So that would be my biggest piece of advice. Don't wait for the diagnosis. If you want to seek the diagnosis, seek it, but there's nothing holding you back from making changes now.
Beautiful. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing your story, your vulnerability, and your strengths. I highly recommend working with Janine, and her link will be in the chat and in the bio below. So connect with her. She does one-on-one coaching. She does group coaching. She'll work with your business and organization and help other people who are extremely successful because they have ADHD to help them live better and more authentic lives. Thanks so much for being on the show, and we'll see you hopefully maybe very soon. You might even be here next week. We'll see.
All
Thanks so
right.
much
It
for your
was
time.
great talking to you, Cheryl.
Peace.